My father banned me from all family gatherings because I don't possess a proper job like my doctor sister and engineer brother, though he doesn't know I earn twice their salaries. Can you imagine being told by your own father that you're an embarrassment? That your career isn't respectable enough for family holidays? That you don't even belong at the dinner table? Well, that was my life. For years. Until one day, the tables completely turned, and the very people who pushed me away came knocking. Hard. What the hell happened next? Let me tell you. My dad decided a while back that I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. Why? Because I dared to quit my corporate bank job to work online. To him, if you weren't clocking in at a traditional office, you were basically unemployed. My sister Rachel, she's a pediatrician. My brother Timothy, a civil engineer. Me? I do digital marketing from my laptop. And in Dad's world, that meant I was, well, he actually used the word embarrassment when explaining why I wasn't invited to Christmas dinner last year. An embarrassment. Can you believe that? What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just getting by. I was running 3 incredibly successful online businesses. It started 5 years ago with freelance copywriting. I poured my heart into it, building it piece by piece, until it became a thriving agency with a dozen contractors working for me. Then I launched an email marketing course that, honestly, brings in a cool $15,000 a month in passive income. And last year, I invested as a silent partner in 2 software companies. My accountant actually jokes that I need more tax shelters. That's how well things are going. Meanwhile, Rachel, my sister the pediatrician, makes maybe $90,000 a year, still drowning under student loans. Timothy, the state civil engineer, pulls in about $70,000. And me? I cleared $380,000 last year. But guess who gets invited to Dad's birthday parties? Rachel and Timothy. Guess who sits at the family table every holiday? Not me. I was usually ordering takeout, eating alone. Dad would proudly post photos on social media, just the 2 of them, raving about his successful children. How is parenting created? Doctors and engineers. Never a single mention of his 3rd kid. The one sitting at home, in pajamas, making more in a month than he made in his best year. For so long, I kept waiting. I kept thinking, he'll ask me eventually. He'll show some curiosity about my life, what I'm actually doing. But instead, the calls were just variations of the same theme. I heard about a job opening at a bank, entry level, just until you figure things out. Or there's an administrative assistant role, maybe retail management. Like I was lost, adrift, instead of building an empire from my living room. It was infuriating. My mom, bless her heart, she sensed something was off, I guess, when I bought a house with cash. Nothing extravagant, just a nice 4-bedroom in a good neighborhood. She asked how I afforded it, and I said my online work was going well. She just said, "Oh, that's nice," and changed the subject to her garden. Not a single person in my family ever asked for details about what I actually did. Not until last month. That's when everything exploded. Dad called me on a Wednesday afternoon, which was already weird. He never called during work hours. His voice, usually so booming and self-assured, sounded absolutely panicked. He'd been laid off. After 28 years with the company, his regional manager position was gone. 2 weeks severance. Pension contributions canceled. He was 61, too young for Social Security, too old to easily find another management role. He needed help. Specifically, he needed someone who understood online business, because that's where all the opportunities are now. Could I teach him? Help him set something up? He'd done some research, he said, and realized there was real money in digital work. Then he dropped it. You must know something about it, since you're getting by. Getting by. That's what he thought. While I was scraping together enough for rent and ramen, apparently, I actually had more in savings than he'd accumulated in 3 decades. The audacity. I told him I'd think about it and call him back. Instead, I called Rachel. I casually mentioned Dad had reached out for help with an online business. She actually laughed. He must be desperate to ask you, she giggled. He's been telling everyone at the club that you're taking a gap year to find yourself. At 32, I asked. He says you're a late bloomer, she replied, still finding it hilarious. My own sister. Timothy was even worse. Maybe this will motivate you to get serious about a career, he lectured. Dad seeing you struggle might be the wake-up call he needs to stop enabling you. Enabling me? My stomach twisted. They actually thought Dad was supporting me financially this whole time. That evening, I drove straight to Dad's house. No call ahead. No warning. He answered the door in his pajamas at 4 p.m., already looking utterly defeated. I told him, with a perfectly straight face, that I could absolutely help him make money online. His face lit up, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. Then I told him my consulting rate, for $100 an hour. Minimum 10 hours to get started. He laughed. A short, dismissive bark. Family doesn't charge family. We're family, he sputtered. Are we? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Then where was my invitation to Easter dinner? To Rachel's engagement party? Timothy's graduation celebration? He stiffened. Those were for immediate family who'd made something of themselves. I made $380,000 last year, I told him, the words like cold steel. What did you make? He just stood there, staring. His face went red, then white, then red again. He started stammering, something about how I should have told him, how he would have included me if he'd known. You only want successful children at your table, I shot back, my voice trembling now. I've been successful for 5 years. You just never bothered to ask. I pulled up my tax returns on my phone. Shoved the screen in his face. The numbers. Right there. His eyes widened, scanning the page. The sheer, naked shock on his face, it was almost satisfying. I turned and walked out. Before I even made it to the main road, my phone started blowing up. Rachel. Her name flashing on the screen. My hands were already shaking too much to drive safely, so I pulled over into a gas station parking lot. She didn't bother with a hello. Her voice, tight and sharp, pierced through the phone. Is what Dad just told me, is it actually true about your income? Yeah, I said, my own voice a little shaky. The numbers are real. Every single dollar of it. A second of dead silence, just her breathing. Then, how long have you been making that kind of money? 5 years, I told her, since I started the agency and built it up. She made this weird sound, like she couldn't decide if she wanted to laugh or yell. Are you calling to apologize for laughing at me earlier? I asked, the bitterness thick in my throat, or just to make sure I wasn't lying to Dad. That's not fair, she snapped. Neither was your thinking it was funny that Dad was desperate enough to ask me for help, I countered. She tried to say something else, but I just told her I needed to go and hung up. 10 minutes later, still sitting in that parking lot, my phone buzzed again. Timothy this time. His voice had that smug, accusatory edge it gets when he thinks he's caught someone in a lie. He flat out said there was no way I made that much money. I must have shown Dad fake tax documents or something. I actually laughed. A harsh, humorless sound. Of course, Timothy would think I was scamming our father rather than consider he might have been wrong about me for 5 years. I can send you my actual tax returns directly, I offered, if you want to verify them with your own eyes. Complete silence. Not the thoughtful kind, where someone's processing what to say next. This was the silence of someone who just got hit with something they couldn't possibly process. I waited. Maybe 15 seconds. Then he hung up without another word. I sat there in my car for another 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. My hands were still shaking, adrenaline coursing through me from confronting Dad and dealing with my siblings. I kept seeing Dad's face when I showed him those numbers. The way it went red, then drained white, then surged red again. All those years. All those calls about job listings for bank teller positions, retail management. All those times he told people I was taking a gap year to find myself when I was actually building something real. The family dinners I ordered takeout for while they all sat around his table. The birthday parties I wasn't invited to. The holidays spent alone. Every single dismissive comment and pitying look replayed in my head, a relentless loop of hurt and anger. I finally drove home. Sitting in a gas station parking lot wasn't helping anything. My house felt different when I walked in. Same furniture, same layout, but something had fundamentally shifted. I poured myself a whiskey and sat down at my desk, where my laptop was still open. My business dashboard showed today's revenue across all three companies. The course had brought in $2,000 from new enrollments. The agency had invoiced a client for $8,000. The software investments showed steady passive returns. Numbers I looked at every single day now suddenly felt charged. For 5 years, this money had been completely invisible to my family. They had no idea it existed. Now, it felt like the only thing they could see, like I'd been this ghost to them, and the tax returns had made me suddenly real, but only because of the dollar signs. Mom called that evening, while I was still at my desk with my second drink. Her voice had that careful quality she uses when she's trying not to upset anyone. She said Dad had told her everything, and she wanted to know why I'd never mentioned how well I was doing financially. I reminded her, "Mom, you asked me once, when I bought the house. I told you my online work was going well. You said that was nice, and then changed the subject to the garden." She was quiet for a moment. Then she admitted she didn't want to pry into my business. Said she assumed if it was important, I would tell them about it. That made me laugh, but not in a funny way. I was literally excluded from family events for years because Dad thought I was an embarrassment. I told her, the frustration boiling over. She tried to say she didn't know it was that bad. "That's because nobody bothered to ask me how I felt about any of it," I shot back. The conversation ended with her saying we should talk more later, and me agreeing, even though I wasn't sure what else there was to say. She hung up. I went back to staring at my laptop screen. Rachel texted instead of calling again, around 9 p.m. A long message, full of excuses about how she didn't know Dad was excluding me from everything. She claimed she thought I was just busy with my own life and didn't want to come to family stuff. I read it twice. Didn't respond. The lie was just too obvious. She literally told me earlier that Dad was telling people at his club I was taking a gap year. She knew exactly what he thought of me, and she went right along with it. Probably even agreed with him. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Timothy. Subject line, "We need to talk," in all caps. Like he was my boss or something. The email opened with him expressing concern about my relationship with Dad. He went on for 3 paragraphs about how I should be more understanding of Dad's generation and their views on traditional careers. How Dad grew up in a different time, when you worked for one company your whole life and got a pension. How online business and digital work didn't make sense to people like him. My blood was boiling by the time I finished reading it. Timothy was actually trying to make me feel bad for standing up to Dad after years of being treated like a failure. I responded with one single line. "Would you be understanding if Dad had excluded you from family events for 7 years? Then I closed my laptop and went to make coffee. Timothy never replied. My phone rang again around noon. This time it was Catherine from my agency. She wanted to talk about a new client contract worth $30,000 over 6 months for a complete brand overhaul. The normalcy of talking about actual business helped ground me back in reality. We discussed the scope of work, the timeline, which contractors would be best for the project. Before she hung up, Catherine mentioned she was really grateful for the steady work and flexible schedule. Said it let her pick her kids up from school every day and still make good money. That reminder hit different after everything with my family. My choices hadn't just built my own success. They'd created real opportunities for 12 other people who worked with my agency. People who counted on the contracts I brought in. But my family had spent 5 years thinking I was unemployed and getting by on Dad's charity. The irony was almost unbearable. 2 days passed before my phone rang with Dad's number. I let it ring 3 times, needing to decide how I felt about talking to him. His voice came through, quiet and careful, nothing like his usual confident tone. He asked if I was still willing to help him learn about online business. And he said he understood my consulting rate was $400 an hour. I told him I needed to think about it and would get back to him soon. He said, okay, without arguing or trying to negotiate, which felt bizarre coming from a man who'd spent my whole life telling everyone what to do. The call lasted maybe 2 minutes total. When I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, wondering if this was actually my father or some stranger using his voice. 3 days later, I drove to Marco's office for our quarterly tax planning session. His office, in a sleek new downtown building with big windows, always made me feel more successful than I actually felt. Marco opened his laptop and pulled up my financial reports, but I couldn't focus on the numbers. He asked what was wrong, and I ended up telling him everything. Dad's layoff, the confrontation, my siblings thinking I was broke this whole time. Marco listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair. He pointed out that my family's wrong opinion about my success didn't change the actual money in my accounts or the businesses I'd built. The logic made sense, but it didn't help the ache sitting in my chest like a rock. We finished the tax planning, and he reminded me about estimated payments due next month and suggested forming an LLC for liability protection. I drove home thinking about how Marco treated my business like it was real and legitimate, while my own family had spent 5 years assuming I was failing. Saturday morning, I was working at my kitchen table when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Rachel sitting in her sedan, gripping the steering wheel like she wasn't sure if she should get out. She finally opened her door and walked up to my porch, looking visibly uncomfortable in jeans and a sweater instead of her usual professional scrubs. I opened the door before she could knock, because watching her just stand there felt awkward. She asked if we could talk, and I stepped aside to let her in, even though a part of me wanted to just close the door. Rachel sat on my couch, looking around my living room like she was seeing it for the first time, even though she'd been here twice before years ago. She started talking about how she'd been thinking about our phone conversation and about what Dad told her. Then, she admitted it. She'd been jealous. Jealous of my flexibility and freedom to work from home, while she was stuck at the hospital, battling insurance companies, difficult parents, and the endless politics between doctors. Her student loans, she confessed, ate most of her paycheck every month. She'd been paying them for 8 years, with another 12 to go. The apology that came next felt more like she was trying to make herself feel better than actually caring about how I felt. But at least it was something. I told her about all the holidays I'd spent alone, ordering Chinese food or pizza, while she posted smiling photos of family dinners on social media. About Dad's birthday parties where I wasn't invited, and her engagement party that I found out about through Mom's casual mention 3 weeks after it happened. About Timothy's master's graduation celebration that nobody told me was happening until I saw the pictures online. Rachel started crying. She said she truly didn't realize Dad was actively excluding me from everything. She honestly thought I was just busy with my own life and didn't want to come to family stuff. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me knew she just hadn't cared enough to notice or to ask why I was never around. That evening, my phone rang again, Timothy's name on the screen. Rachel must have called him right after leaving my house. His voice had that defensive edge he always got when he thought someone was criticizing him. He claimed he didn't know the full extent of Dad's exclusion. Said if I'd told them directly about being left out, they would have included me. Why, I asked, my voice flat, should I have needed to beg my own family to let me come to holiday dinners? He went quiet for a few seconds. Then he said he had to go and hung up before I could say anything else. The conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes and left me feeling more annoyed than before he called. Wednesday afternoon, Mom texted, asking if I wanted to meet for lunch at a restaurant halfway between our houses. I agreed, because she, at least, seemed genuinely sorry about everything instead of making excuses. The restaurant was one of those chain places, too many menu options, trying too hard to look rustic. Mom arrived first, already ordering appetizers for both of us without asking what I wanted. She caught herself, apologized for still treating me like a kid who couldn't order his own food. We talked about neutral stuff for a few minutes until the main food arrived. Then she started explaining what was really happening with Dad. His layoff, she revealed, came with almost no severance. The company was downsizing, in financial trouble, and they'd cut everyone's packages. He was terrified about money for the first time in his life. He'd always had a steady income, never worried about bills. His pension wouldn't start for 4 more years when he turned 65. They had maybe 6 months of savings to cover expenses. Mom picked at her salad, then asked if I would consider helping Dad. Not because he deserves it, she said, her voice small, but because I need you to help. She was worried about their retirement, about their marriage, which she said couldn't handle the stress of him being unemployed and scared. The request made me feel manipulated, like she was using her own worry to guilt me into doing something for Dad. But I also genuinely cared about Mom. I didn't want her suffering because of Dad's pride and stubbornness. I told her I would help Dad with basic online business education, but I wasn't giving him money or doing the work for him. And my consulting rate? It was staying at $400 an hour. Mom's face relaxed, and she thanked me 3 times in a row. Then she mentioned that Rachel was struggling with her student loans more than anyone in the family knew, and that she'd been talking about picking up extra shifts at the hospital. I drove home feeling like I'd agreed to something I might regret, but also knowing I couldn't watch my parents struggle when I had the knowledge to help them, even if Dad had spent years treating me like garbage. That evening, I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes before going inside. The conversation with Mom kept replaying in my head. I needed to focus on whether Dad could actually build something, or if this would all be a waste of time. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and started searching for information about Dad's old company and his role there. His LinkedIn profile showed 28 years in sales and management positions, steady promotions. He started as a regional sales rep and worked his way up to managing a team of 15 people across 3 states. The skills were there if I looked past the corporate job title. He knew how to build client relationships and close deals. He understood sales cycles and customer pain points. Those abilities? They could absolutely transfer to consulting or coaching if he was willing to learn a different approach. I made notes about potential business models that might work for someone with his background. Consulting for small manufacturing companies seemed realistic. They often needed operational help but couldn't afford full-time executives. Dad could offer project-based work using his management experience. I sketched out a rough plan for what he'd need to learn first: basic online marketing, email outreach, building a simple website, pricing his services. None of it was complicated, but it would require him to accept that his old corporate playbook didn't apply here. My phone rang. Luis showed up on the screen. I answered, and he launched into talking about our software investment without any greeting. The Q3 numbers looked strong, revenue up 32% from last quarter. User growth was accelerating, and the product team had shipped 3 major features. He asked if I wanted to increase my stake in the next funding round. They were raising another $2 million and offering existing investors the chance to add to their positions before bringing in new money. I told him to send me the details and I'd review the terms. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes and felt normal, in a way that family stuff never did. Business just kept moving forward, regardless of whether Dad was learning to respect my career or Rachel was figuring out I wasn't a failure. That consistency was weirdly comforting when everything else felt so unstable. After hanging up with Luis, I opened a blank email to Dad. I typed out what I was willing to teach him, starting with online business basics and marketing fundamentals. Listed the time. Commitment: 2 sessions per week for at least 8 weeks. Included my rate: $400 per hour, payment due before each session. I explained that I'd provide resources and assignments, but he needed to do the actual work. No shortcuts. No expecting me to build his business for him. I reread the email 3 times, then saved it as a draft instead of sending. Something about hitting send felt too final, like I was committing to a relationship I wasn't sure I wanted. I closed the laptop and made dinner. Watched some show on streaming without paying attention. Went to bed still thinking about whether I was doing this because I genuinely wanted to help, or because Mom had guilt me into it. The next morning, I opened the draft email again and read it one more time. The terms were fair. The boundaries were clear. If Dad wanted my help, he'd have to meet me as a professional, not as his kid who owed him something. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Dad's response came through 53 minutes later. He agreed to all the terms. Asked when we could start. His tone in the email was different from anything I'd ever heard from him. Eager, but also humble. He thanked me for being willing to teach him and said he understood this was business, not family obligation. Reading his words felt strange, like someone had replaced my actual father with a person who knew how to be respectful. The eagerness made me uncomfortable because I didn't know this version of him. The dad I knew was confident to the point of arrogance. This guy sounded almost desperate. I suggested we meet Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between our houses, neutral ground where neither of us had a home advantage. He responded within minutes, saying that worked perfectly. Thursday morning, I packed my laptop and a notebook with my rough outline for teaching him. Drove to the coffee shop and got there 10 minutes early. Dad was already sitting at a corner table with a brand new laptop, still in its box, and a spiral notebook that had notes covering the first 5 pages. He was dressed in business casual, like this was a job interview. When I sat down, he opened the notebook and showed me the questions he'd written. They were organized by category, with headers like online business models and digital marketing basics. He'd approached this like studying for a test, which was very him. The effort was obvious, even if the method was outdated. I appreciated that he'd prepared, even while keeping my emotional distance. I started explaining the basic types of online businesses and how they made money, service-based like my agency, product-based like e-commerce, information-based like my course, software and apps, affiliate marketing. Dad took notes on everything and kept trying to fit what I said into frameworks from his corporate job. He'd ask how this compared to traditional sales funnels, or where the org chart fit in a one-person business. Every few minutes, I had to stop him and explain that those concepts didn't apply here. Online business operated on different principles. Flatter structures, direct customer relationships, digital delivery. He got frustrated when I said his management experience wouldn't translate directly. His jaw tightened, and I could see him wanting to argue, but he caught himself. Just nodded. Asked me to explain it differently. That moment of stopping himself from dismissing my knowledge felt like progress, even if it was tiny. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel during our session. She wanted to know if we could meet again because she had something to tell me that she didn't say before. I texted back that I could do coffee near her hospital on Saturday. She sent back 3 thank you messages in a row. Dad noticed me texting and asked if everything was okay. I told him it was just Rachel and got back to explaining email marketing basics. We worked for another hour before I called it for the day. Dad packed up his new laptop carefully and thanked me twice before leaving. The whole interaction felt surreal. Saturday morning, I met Rachel at a coffee place 2 blocks from the hospital. She looked tired in her scrubs, like she'd just finished a shift. We ordered drinks and sat outside, even though it was cold. She spent the first few minutes talking about work stress and her upcoming wedding. Then she got quiet, staring at her coffee cup. Finally, she admitted it. She'd been telling people at work that I was between careers, not unemployed exactly, but figuring things out. She said she felt embarrassed trying to explain digital marketing to doctors who barely understood social media. They all had traditional careers, and she didn't want to deal with their questions about what her brother actually did. The confession clearly cost her some pride. Her voice got quieter as she talked. I recognized the family trait we apparently shared, both of us caring too much about what other people thought. Both of us choosing status over honesty. That afternoon, Timothy sent an email with the subject line, apology. The message read like he'd workshopped it with his wife. Formal sentences acknowledging that his assumptions about my career were wrong. Admitting his attitude had been condescending and unfair. Recognizing that he judged me without knowing the facts. The stiffness made it feel less genuine, but I could tell he meant it. He wasn't naturally good at apologies. I wrote back accepting it and saying we could move forward. Kept my response short because I wasn't ready for a long conversation about feelings. Thursday came around again for our second session with Dad. This time, he showed up with his laptop already set up and pages of notes from researching between our meetings. He'd watched YouTube videos about online business and read 3 articles I'd sent him. I could see he was actually trying instead of just going through the motions. We talked about my course business and how passive income worked. He asked detailed questions about how I built the audience and created the content. Seemed genuinely impressed when I explained the model. Then he admitted something that surprised me. He said he always thought passive income was a scam. One of those get-rich-quick schemes that people fell for. That's why he'd been so dismissive when I first mentioned online work. He genuinely believed I was wasting my time on something fake. The admission explained a lot about his earlier attitude, even if it didn't excuse the years of exclusion. Our next session happened 3 days later at the same coffee shop. Dad arrived early again, laptop open, notebook filled with more questions about email marketing. I walked him through setting up an email service provider account and watched him type with 2 fingers, hunting for each key on the keyboard. He got frustrated trying to navigate the interface, kept clicking the wrong buttons. His face turned red when he accidentally deleted a draft email he'd spent 10 minutes writing, but he didn't quit or make excuses. He asked me to show him again and took notes on every step. I explained how to build an email list and create a welcome sequence. Dad listened carefully and asked questions that showed he was actually thinking about how this could work for his situation. He wanted to know how long it took to build a list and what kind of response rates I got. When I told him my course had generated over 2,000 subscribers in the first year, he looked genuinely impressed instead of skeptical. We worked for 90 minutes, and he paid attention the whole time without checking his phone or seeming distracted. At the end, he thanked me and asked if we could do another session next week. I agreed and watched him pack up his laptop carefully, like it was something precious. Driving home, I realized my anger had softened a little bit, even though I wanted to hold on to it. Seeing him actually try instead of just talking about trying made a difference I hadn't expected. Mom called that evening while I was making dinner. She thanked me for helping Dad and said he'd been different at home over the past couple weeks. More humble and focused instead of defeated and angry. He spent hours each night working through the materials I'd sent him and watching tutorial videos. She mentioned the sessions were giving him purpose beyond just sending out resumes and getting rejected. The job hunting had been really hard on him, getting turned down for positions he was overqualified for because companies didn't want to hire someone his age. Learning something new made him feel less useless. I told her I was just teaching him what he paid me to teach. She said it was more than that, but didn't push when I didn't respond. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important before hanging up. Rachel texted me 2 days later, asking if I wanted to come to dinner at her place. Just her and her fiancé, not Dad or Timothy. She said she wanted to spend time with me separate from the bigger family stuff. I stared at the message for a while, trying to figure out her angle, but it seemed genuine, so I texted back that I could do Saturday night. She sent the address and said to come around 7 p.m. Saturday evening, I drove to Rachel's apartment in the nice part of town near the hospital. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. Her fiancé stood behind her, smiling. I realized I'd never actually met him properly. I'd missed his proposal, their engagement party, and months of their relationship because I wasn't part of the family events where these things happened. The weight of all that lost time hit different from the anger over being excluded. This wasn't just about me being left out. It was about missing pieces of my sister's life that I couldn't get back. Rachel introduced him, and we shook hands. He seemed nice enough, friendly without being fake. We sat in their living room and talked about normal stuff for a while. Rachel made pasta, and we ate at their small dining table. The conversation felt careful at first, like we were all trying not to say the wrong thing. Then her fiancé mentioned he'd been following my email marketing course and finding it really helpful for his dental practice. He'd been trying to build his patient base, and my techniques for writing subject lines and creating sequences actually worked. Rachel looked genuinely surprised and asked when he started taking my course. He said about 3 months ago, after finding it through a search for dental marketing resources. She clearly didn't even know he was interested in my work at all. I watched her face as she realized how much she dismissed my career that she never even mentioned it to her own partner. He kept talking about specific lessons from the course that helped him and asking me questions about advanced strategies. Rachel got quieter as the conversation went on. After dinner, she pulled me aside in the kitchen while her fiancé cleaned up. She admitted she felt stupid for not taking my work seriously when her own fiancé was literally paying to learn from me. I told her it was fine, but we both knew it wasn't really fine. We went back to the living room and talked for another hour before I left. The evening felt like a start of something. Not a fix for everything, but an actual attempt to rebuild our relationship separate from Dad and the rest of the family. Timothy sent me an email on Monday with the subject line asking for advice. He was thinking about starting a side project doing consulting for other civil engineers. Wanted to know if I had time for a call to discuss how to set it up and market his services. I wrote back that I could do a call on Wednesday. We talked for 40 minutes and he was awkward the whole time. Clearly not used to asking me for help or treating me like I knew more than him about something. But he was genuine in wanting my advice. He took notes and asked follow-up questions. Thanked me at the end and said he appreciated my time. It wasn't a big moment, but it felt significant anyway. Thursday came around for our third session with Dad. He showed up with pages of notes from researching my agency online between our meetings. He'd found the website and read through all the client testimonials. People praising my work, talking about how my strategies helped their businesses grow. He said he never looked before because he assumed it wasn't a real company. Just assumed I was doing some kind of scam or minimal freelance work. His shame was visible in how he couldn't quite make eye contact while admitting this. I didn't say anything right away, let him sit with it. Then I told him about the years I wanted to share my success with him. The first time I hit $10,000 in a month and wanted to call him, but knew he wouldn't care. When I signed my first major client and celebrated alone in my apartment. Launching my course and watching it succeed while my family thought I was unemployed. All the milestones I hit without anyone to tell because my own father had decided my work didn't matter. He listened without defending himself or making excuses. The silence between us felt different from before, heavier with a real understanding of what his dismissal had caused. We sat there for a full minute not talking before moving on to the lesson. Mom called again a few days later with a different kind of request. She wanted to have a family dinner at her house with everyone, including me. A real dinner where we all sat down together like a normal family. I told her I wasn't sure about sitting at that table after everything that happened. She promised it would be different this time. Said she'd talk to everyone and they understood things needed to change. Asked me to give them one chance to do it right. I stayed quiet, thinking about whether I was ready for that. Whether sitting at their table again would feel like forgiveness I hadn't fully given yet. Finally, I told her I'd come, but with one condition. If anyone dismissed my career or made jokes about my work, I was leaving immediately. No discussion, no second chances. Mom agreed right away and said she'd make that clear to everyone before the dinner. We set a date for the following Sunday. After hanging up, I sat with the decision, wondering if I was making a mistake or taking a necessary step forward. I found a therapist through my insurance website the next morning and booked the first available appointment for that Friday. Her office was in a converted house with too many plants and abstract art on the walls that probably meant something profound. She asked me to explain why I was there, and I told her about the family situation. The years of exclusion, Dad's sudden need for help, showing him my tax returns. She listened without interrupting and took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she asked how I felt about the upcoming dinner at Mom's house. I said I didn't know if I was ready to sit at their table after everything, but I also didn't want to keep holding on to anger forever. She nodded and said those two feelings could exist at the same time. I could be hurt by the past and still open to change, without making either feeling less real or valid. The session lasted 50 minutes, and I left feeling like I had permission to be uncertain instead of needing to have everything figured out. Sunday came faster than I wanted. I drove to Mom's house at 6 o'clock and sat in the driveway for 5 minutes before going inside. Everyone was already there when I walked in. The living room went quiet, and Dad stood up from the couch, looking uncomfortable in khakis and a button-down shirt, like he was dressed for a job interview. He thanked me for coming and for helping him learn about online business. The formality in his voice made the whole thing feel rehearsed. Rachel mentioned that her fiancé had been taking my email marketing course and finding it really useful for his dental practice. Timothy asked about my software investments and how I decided which companies to put money into. Their questions felt careful and polite, like they were walking on glass. Mom called us to the table, and we sat down to pot roast and mashed potatoes. Nobody knew what to say, so we passed dishes around in silence, broken only by requests for salt or butter. The awkwardness pressed down on all of us until I couldn't take it anymore. Halfway through the meal, I just started talking about a client situation from last month where the guy kept changing his mind about his website copy after I'd already written 4 different versions. Everyone actually listened instead of checking their phones or interrupting. Rachel asked questions about how I handled difficult clients, and Timothy wanted to know about my process for setting boundaries with people who didn't respect my time. The conversation started flowing more naturally, and it felt strange, but good, to have them treat my work like it was real and legitimate instead of a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. Timothy put down his fork and admitted he'd been unhappy in his state job for years. Said he was jealous of my freedom to work from anywhere and make my own schedule. The confession surprised everyone, including Rachel, who stared at him. She added that she was burning out at the hospital and sometimes questioned whether becoming a doctor was the right choice or just what everyone expected her to do. Suddenly, we were having an actual, honest conversation instead of performing politeness for Mom's benefit. Dad stayed quiet during most of this, keeping his eyes on his plate. Mom finally prompted him to say something, and he looked up at all 3 of us. He said he was realizing that he raised us to value status and titles over our actual satisfaction with our lives. The admission didn't fix years of hurt or erase the exclusion, but it acknowledged something real about why our family worked the way it did. After dinner, Dad asked if we could keep doing our sessions and if I'd help him develop a real business plan instead of just teaching him basics. I agreed and mentioned I'd lower my rate since he was serious about actually building something instead of just exploring options. He nodded and thanked me again, less formal this time. Over the next few days, Rachel started texting me random stuff that had nothing to do with family drama. Memes about online shopping and articles about digital marketing trends she thought I'd find interesting. The messages were small, but they felt like building something new between us instead of trying to repair something that was broken. Our 5th session happened at the coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. Dad showed up with a leather folder and pulled out printed pages. He'd written an actual business plan for consulting with small manufacturing companies about operational efficiency. The plan played to his real strengths from decades of management experience and showed he'd been thinking seriously about what he could offer. I read through it and told him honestly that it was good, that he'd identified a real market need and positioned himself well. He smiled and asked what he should do next. I suggested talking to Marco about the tax setup for his business structure before he started taking clients. Dad agreed immediately. I called Marco that afternoon and set up a meeting for Thursday. Watching my father sit across from my accountant and take notes about LLC formation and quarterly estimated taxes felt significant. Marco treated him with professional respect, and Dad asked smart questions about deductions and record keeping. After the meeting, Dad shook Marco's hand and thanked him for his time, then me for the introduction. 2 weeks later, Timothy called while I was working on a client project. He'd launched his consulting business for civil engineers with my advice about pricing and marketing. His first client had just signed a contract for a 3-month project. Timothy's voice was excited in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. He thanked me and admitted he should have asked for my help years ago instead of judging my choices and assuming I didn't know what I was doing. I told him I was glad his business was working out and to call me if he needed anything else. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it mattered more than the length suggested. Mom called 3 days later asking what I wanted to bring to Thanksgiving. Not telling me what to bring or suggesting I pick up rolls from the store. Asking what I actually wanted to contribute, like my opinion mattered. I suggested making my roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon because I'd gotten good at them over the years of cooking alone. She said that sounded perfect and asked if I'd also make my maple glazed carrots because she remembered I'd mentioned making them once. The fact that she remembered anything about my cooking hit me harder than it should have. We talked about timing and who else was coming, and she included me in every decision, like I'd always been part of these conversations. The normalcy felt good and painful at the same time because it showed how easy it could have been all along. Thanksgiving morning, I drove to my parents' house with 2 dishes and a bottle of wine. Rachel was already there, setting the table, and she smiled when I walked in. A real smile, not a polite one. Timothy arrived with his wife and shook my hand, then helped me carry stuff from my car without anyone asking him to. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing and felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the oven. During dinner, Dad actually mentioned my business when my aunt asked what I was up to these days. He explained about my agency and my course and the consulting I do. Not bragging, but not hiding it either. Just stating facts like they were normal and worth sharing. My uncle asked how the online business world worked, and I started explaining email marketing basics. Rachel jumped in, talking about my course and how her fiancé was using it for his dental practice. She described the whole curriculum with pride in her voice, telling everyone how I'd built something that actually helped people. 3 more relatives asked questions about starting online businesses, and I found myself giving impromptu advice about platforms and pricing models. My other uncle, Dad's brother, asked why he'd never heard about any of this success before. The table went quiet. I watched Dad's face as he decided how to answer. He said he didn't understand or value what I was doing until recently. Admitted he'd been wrong to dismiss it and wrong to exclude me from family events because of his own narrow view of success. The honesty was uncomfortable and everyone shifted in their seats, but it cleared the air better than pretending the past didn't happen. My aunt nodded and said she was glad he'd figured it out, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Later that evening, after most people left, I sat down with Mom, Dad, Rachel, and Timothy in the living room. I told them I wanted regular contact, but I wouldn't accept being included only when it was convenient or when they needed something from me. Said I wanted to be part of family events going forward. But if anyone made jokes about my career or treated my work as less than theirs, I'd leave, and they wouldn't see me again. Mom agreed immediately, and Dad nodded, looking tired but accepting. Rachel and Timothy both said they understood and wanted me around more. 2 weeks later, Dad called in the middle of my workday, his voice higher than normal. He'd landed his first consulting contract with a local manufacturer who needed help fixing their operational problems. The company was paying him $6,000 for a 3-month project, and he sounded like a kid who'd just won a prize. He talked fast about the client meeting and how he'd used the pitch framework I'd taught him, and how they'd signed the contract that same afternoon. I realized while listening that this was the first time he'd called to share good news with me in years, maybe ever. The excitement in his voice was real and unguarded, and it made something loosen in my chest that I didn't know was still tight. Rachel texted me the next week, asking if I'd be willing to teach a financial literacy workshop at her hospital. She said the residents were drowning in student debt and had no idea how to manage money or build wealth. I agreed, and she immediately started promoting it to her colleagues, sending emails introducing her brother, the business expert who was going to teach them about financial planning. She copied me on the emails, and I could see her fully owning my expertise to people she worked with every day. The workshop ended up with 40 residents signed up, and Rachel introduced me with genuine pride, listing my accomplishments and telling everyone they were lucky to learn from me. Timothy called asking if we could have lunch to discuss his consulting business. He'd landed enough clients that he was thinking about leaving his state job within the next year. We met at a restaurant near his office, and he had a notebook full of questions about transition planning, scaling, and managing multiple projects. He treated me like a legitimate business mentor rather than his younger brother who needed guidance. Asked my advice and took notes and thanked me for my time like I was a professional consultant he'd hired. The shift in how he saw me was obvious in every question he asked and every piece of advice he carefully wrote down. I had another session with my therapist that Thursday and found myself talking about my family differently. The anger that had been driving most of my thoughts for months had shifted into something quieter. I told her I felt cautiously hopeful about my family relationships now, that the hurt from years of exclusion hadn't disappeared, but it wasn't defining every interaction anymore. She pointed out that I was processing my feelings instead of just reacting to them, that I'd moved from justified rage to mature boundary setting. The progress felt real, even though I knew the hurt would probably always be there in some form. Mom called in early December asking if I wanted to help plan Christmas. Not just asking what I wanted to bring, but actually including me in decisions about timing and location and what traditions we'd follow. She said she wanted to start some new traditions that included me from the beginning rather than just adding me to existing ones. We talked about doing Christmas Eve at her house and Christmas morning at mine, splitting the holiday so everyone had time at both places. The idea of hosting Christmas morning at my house, of my family coming to my space, felt significant in a way I couldn't quite explain. Dad's consulting business brought in its first payment the week before Christmas. He took Mom out to dinner to celebrate, then called me that night to say thank you. Not a vague thanks for everything, but specific gratitude for teaching him skills that gave him a future when he thought his career was over. He said the business was growing faster than he'd expected, and he'd already lined up 2 more clients for January. His gratitude was genuine and detailed, acknowledging exactly what I'd done and how it had changed his situation. He mentioned he'd been wrong about so many things, but especially about not seeing my success for what it was. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, and when we hung up, I sat in my office staring at my laptop, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in my family that couldn't be undone. Mom hosted a dinner at their house the first week of December, and everyone showed up on time for once. We sat around the same table where I'd been excluded for years, passing dishes and talking about work and weather and normal family stuff. Timothy started telling a story about when he was 12 and tried to impress a girl by climbing the neighbor's fence, except he got stuck halfway over and had to be helped down by her dad. Rachel laughed so hard she nearly choked on her wine, and Dad added details about having to apologize to the neighbors while Timothy hid in his room. I found myself laughing too, not as an outsider watching someone else's family, but as part of the actual memory, even though I'd been too young to remember it clearly. The conversation moved through other stories, shared jokes, moments from our childhood that included me naturally. Nobody made a big deal about my presence or treated it like a special occasion. I was just there, part of the family history instead of someone listening from outside. Rachel mentioned a difficult case at the hospital and asked my opinion on the communication strategy, treating my expertise as valuable. Timothy talked about his consulting business growth and thanked me again for the advice, without making it awkward. Dad mostly listened, occasionally adding comments, but letting the rest of us carry the conversation. Mom kept refilling glasses and bringing out more food, smiling at all of us around her table in a way that felt content rather than forced. A week later, Rachel invited me to lunch near the hospital with her fiancé. We ordered sandwiches and talked about wedding planning, which I knew almost nothing about since I'd missed the engagement entirely. Her fiancé asked if I'd be willing to stand up with them in the wedding party. Said they wanted people who mattered to both of them involved. Rachel jumped in, explaining that she wanted me there because I'd become important to her life over the past few months, that our relationship felt real now instead of obligatory. The invitation meant something because it was earned through actual connection rather than family duty. I agreed, and she looked genuinely happy, already planning what color ties the wedding party would wear and when we'd need to do fittings. Her fiancé mentioned he'd finished my email marketing course, and it had helped his dental practice bring in 12 new patients. Rachel looked surprised, admitting she hadn't known he was taking it seriously. The whole lunch felt normal, like siblings actually spending time together because they wanted to. Dad called 3 days before his first major client presentation, asking if I could help him prep. We met at a coffee shop and went through his pitch deck slide by slide. He'd put real work into it, building on everything I'd taught him about positioning and value propositions. I helped him tighten the messaging and practice his delivery, watching him get more confident with each run-through. The actual presentation happened the next afternoon, and he called me right after, voice excited like I hadn't heard in years. The client signed a 6-month contract worth $45,000. He thanked me specifically for teaching him skills that gave him a future when he thought his career was over. Said he was proud of what he was building and grateful I'd given him the chance to learn, despite everything. The gratitude felt genuine and detailed, acknowledging what I'd actually done rather than offering vague appreciation. Christmas morning, I drove to my parents' house early, parking in the driveway next to Rachel's car. Mom answered the door in her robe, pulling me into a hug before I'd even stepped inside. The living room had stockings hanging on the mantel. 5 of them, including one with my name that Mom said she'd had for years, but Dad wouldn't let her hang. We opened presents together. The five of us sitting around in pajamas, drinking coffee and laughing at terrible gifts. Dad gave me a book about advanced business strategy with a note inside thanking me for everything. Rachel got me a nice sweater that actually fit. Timothy handed me a gift card with an apology for not knowing what I'd like. Mom made her usual huge breakfast, and we sat around the table eating and talking, making plans for New Year's and discussing Rachel's wedding timeline. It wasn't perfect, and the history didn't disappear, but it was real. I felt genuinely happy sitting there with my family, building something better than what we'd had. This journey with my family, it's been a roller coaster of hurt, anger, and eventually, this fragile, growing hope. What would you have done when faced with that level of dismissal from the people who should have been your biggest cheerleaders? Have you ever had to prove your worth to your own family? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.